Hello everyone. The topic of this video is the kind of format that you can provide to students who are completing the new personal project. What I mean by the new personal project is the new personal project guide that was first examined in May 2022. It's quite a departure from the old personal project. The format of the report is quite different. The requirements are quite different. The criteria are different. And one problem that I'm coming across again and again between schools and when I look at student reports is that a lot of students are still using old report formats. I want to share here the format that I'm providing to my students. You're free to use it, modify it, or however you wish. I certainly don't believe it's perfect. I've changed it in response to the subject report that was released for the May 2022 session. But I do think there are probably some changes that could happen to this format to improve student outcomes. The idea here is that students would receive this format and go through filling it out to the best of their ability with their report. And by the end, if they have done everything that's required, they should, at a minimum, get a passing grade, right? The quality of what they put in will determine where they go from there. But basically providing them with the structure to meet at least the minimum requirements. So let's start going through it quickly. Up the top, we have a place for them to insert their project title. Strictly speaking, there's no requirement to have a project title. I think it's nice to have though, just as a way of introducing the report and what the project was all about. Then we have sections, each one referencing directly one of the criteria. All right, so starting with Objective A, planning. Here you can see we then have subheadings where the students cover each of the strands required for this criteria. First of all, they must state their learning goal, explaining how an interest led to that goal, and providing some kind of evidence. Now, you'll notice that throughout the report, evidence is referenced. The IB doesn't specify where the evidence should be, but if you look at the sample reports that are given, the evidence is in line, meaning that when you talk about a piece of evidence, the piece of evidence is presented there in the report next to that, narrative. I still see a lot of students trying to attach the evidence in the appendix. That's, I think, a carryover from the previous report. A lot of students are taking that as their inspiration. It's not necessary to have an appendix or appendices. And from my perspective, I think it's much better for the examiners to have that evidence in line within the report. Then we have the product goal, where they state their product goal, provide evidence again, and the link between the two, how the learning goal leads to the product goal. Then prior learning, any prior learning the student has that will help them with the project and how it relates to both of the goals. Then the criteria, so they should include their criteria. They should have developed those as a part of the planning process. And an important one that was mentioned within the subject report was an explanation of why those criteria are relevant to the report. It seems that a lot of students were just putting in criteria and it wasn't clear how they directly relate to the project. Then the timeline. So the project timeline or plan, you could also call it a plan. That's what it's called actually in the criteria. We use a Gantt chart for my students for that, but there's actually no specification of what they should use. Basically, this should be a timeline of the project, but focused on product creation only. The student should not be including planning or report writing within their plan. The plan is completely just for product creation. Then the timeline or the plan actually has to directly link to the criteria. So the events of the plan need to be related to the successful completion of the criteria. And this was another point that was made in the subject report. Do all of those things and you've satisfied criteria A. B, applying skills. So here I would say this is the meat of the report here. A lot of attention should be paid by the students to this section. What we have in here are both learning goal and product goal, and you have to give some explanation and evidence of the skills used in the completion of the learning goal and in the completion of the product goal. Now, here you can see I've given room for the students to explain their application of 3 ATL skills for each of the goals. This is completely arbitrary. The IB doesn't specify the number of skills. I think 1 would be too few. I think 4 would be too many. 2 to 3, I think, is really the sweet spot for linking skills to each of the goals. One thing that was highlighted in the subject report from May 2022 was the level of detail. Students can't just express that they use the skill. They actually have to, explain, analyze, give evidence, and the more detail, the better. So for me, 2 skills that are linked and linked in detail are much better than 3 or 4 that are, superficial. And again, evidence in line here where possible. So it's the same for the learning goal and for the product goal. Then we have the reflecting criteria. First of all should be the product evaluation, where they evaluate their product against the success criteria with evidence. Here is really the place where the student should be including evidence of their finished product. Then the project impact. How did this project impact on themselves and their learning? And it should really be like a personal reflection, still with some evidence. They should include some of the reflections they did throughout the process. The order of these is actually, we could say, debatable. The project impact could definitely come before the evaluation. Either way works, as long as they're present. The order is not strict. That goes for really everything in the report, but I feel that the way that it's organized here in this format leaves no room for error, basically. Then we have a few points to note at the bottom. So these aren't sections that should be filled in. These are strictly information. First of all, bibliography prepared as a separate document. This is very important on IBIS. When the coordinator uploads the files, the bibliography is uploaded separately. Now, if you have fewer than 15 pages, you could, strictly speaking, have the bibliography at the end. I think just as a matter of course, it should be done separately just to really confirm that it's there. Here in my format, I specify the MLA format. Other schools use different formats. And actually, there is no IB approved referencing format. As long as the format chosen is consistently and accurately applied, it really doesn't matter which format you choose. A bibliography, by definition, is actually all works used, not just those cited, right? So a reference list is limited to what was cited. A bibliography is actually all works used. And I encourage students to include all of the materials they've referenced, not just those cited directly within the report. So there's nothing against doing that, and I think it removes any doubt about academic honesty. With the formatting, this is actually important. This comes directly from the guide for the new personal project. Has to be kind of a neutral font, right? Times New Roman, Calibri, Arial, something clear and legible. The size can't be smaller than 11, and the margins should be 2 centimeter margins, right? So there's no cheating on the 15-page limit by having narrow margins, by having size 9 text, things like that. So that is really important. It really matters when the items are uploaded and the examiners access them in the online system. If you go outside of those parameters, they might not be able to accurately view everything that you've presented. Then, last of all, a note on evidence. So when you're making claims in the report, it has to be backed by evidence. We use ManageBack, that's why I reference ManageBack here, and the students are encouraged throughout the process of creating their project to keep their journal on manage back, upload relevant documents, etc. So they have that evidence to use later in the report. What you want to avoid is the mad scramble for evidence after the fact, right? It's not really the way it should be done. Now, I say here the evidence should be in line. There's nothing in the guidance from the IB that says it should be in line. This is strictly my personal preference that when they make a point referencing evidence, the evidence should be presented there in line. When using pictures and diagrams or screenshots and things like that, they do have to be fully legible, right? Any text on there needs to be large enough to read, and the picture or whatever it happens to be can't be blurry. And this is a big one here. I've seen so many students make this mistake, is links cannot be used and will not be followed. Every year, still, some student will link to a photo gallery or an online portfolio of some kind, a website that they've created. They will not be followed by examiners. In fact, they cannot be followed. The online marking system doesn't have the functionality to allow for those links to be followed, and they wouldn't follow them even if they could. Only what is on those 15 pages counts, and that really needs to be stressed to the students. So I hope that makes sense. And like I said, this isn't, I think, the final version of this, but I do believe it's a good way for students to structure their report. It's available for you to download below. And if you do it a different way, if you think there's something that should be added, should be different, I would love to hear from you in the comments below. And if you want to see more about the MYP, about IB business management, or just in general, the topics that are covered here, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.